In this video, my intention is to get you up and running with good shots using your OM-1 along with the 90 mm macro lens. Now this is my gear, and besides the 90 mm, I also use the 2x teleconverter called the MC20. This allows me to go up to a magnification of 4x when I need it. Besides this base gear, you would also require a flash and a diffuser. I personally use the Godox V1-O, which is the Olympus compatible flash, and there are two diffusers available in India. One is the Radiant, which is fairly simple to set up and use. The other is the Beetle Pro, which has a flexible, extendable head, which can be extremely useful under certain scenarios for macros. The Beetle is a bit more expensive, but both work great. I will explain the diffusers in more detail in a later video. For now, let's get on to the macro photography part and the settings. So before we get into settings and look at examples, there are two fundamental points that need to be clarified. One is the f-stop. Most of you might have heard that if you shoot beyond or stop down beyond f8, you'll see diffraction, which in theory is correct for most lenses, although the f8 part will vary. At the same time, in the wild, we are not shooting charts or lines, and therefore do not be afraid to stop down to the max your lens has to offer. For example, the OM system 90 mm does a max of f22, and I have plenty of shots at a full f22 which are very sharp, and there's absolutely no issue with it. Of course, you must know when to use what kind of f-stop, and I'll get to that in a bit. The second is the ISO. Most of you would have heard that you should always shoot at the lowest possible ISO. Ideally, what is called the base ISO for your gear, which is ISO 200 for the OM-1. Personally, I would recommend you avoid the base ISO and shoot with a slightly higher ISO. You'll get better shadow details, and in post, you'll be able to do a far better job. There have been occasions where I have used ISO 1600 uh, for insects, tiny insects that are in between leaves and flowers and stuff, where I need to raise the ISO just to get the details. The noise, if any, can always be corrected in post. We have the technology today, so that's never an issue. So the basic 2 points: don't be afraid to stop down, and don't be afraid to push up the ISO. Okay, now some practical tips. Firstly, macro photography is always full manual, including the flash. For the flash, I would recommend you keep it to a wide angle, let's say 14, 17, or 24, but generally not beyond 24. Start with 1/8 of a flash power, maybe even 1/16, depending on your gear. For mirrorless cameras, that is the OM-1, you would also need to switch on the SOVF mode, which is the simulated optical viewfinder, because if you stop down to something like f16, f18, you won't see anything unless you have the SOVF mode on. And if you have set up your camera as I've explained in earlier settings videos, that would be assigned to the exposure compensation button when you're using the macro custom settings. So make sure the SOVF is on. The other thing is, since the depth of field is razor thin for macro photography, we no longer need to use the old way of moving the camera back and forth just to get high magnification. On the OM-1, the single AF point is small enough to actually focus perfectly on even a 2 to 3 mm insect. You can simply focus on the eyes. The best part, the autofocus on the OM-1 works even at a full 4x. Not just 1x, not just 2x, even at 4x, the AF works. If that wasn't enough, you can turn on subject detection for birds, and that will generally catch eyes of the insects, including spiders. So, generally, if it is a breezy condition, what you could do is maybe use a larger AF point, turn subject detection on, and always shoot continuous so you'll get at least one decent shot in breezy conditions. One of the biggest mistakes a lot of people starting out with macros make is they let sunlight fall onto the insect eyes. Now, if the insect has compound eyes, you will see horrible artifacts on the compound eyes. So, always make sure you cover the sun either with your own body or using the diffuser to make sure sunlight is not directly falling on the insect's compound eyes. We'll see examples of this as we go along. Another important point to keep in mind is the background. Sometimes just a few inches to the left or your right can totally change the overall image. If you can get a clean background, definitely attempt that. Last but not the least, let us take a look at the limiter switch on the 90 mm lens. Now, if it is switched to the extreme right, that is till infinity, that gives you a reach like any normal lens. You can shoot whatever. Ideally, you would start with the middle position, that is 1x, and if you switch it to the extreme left, where you see the red S for super macro, then the lens is switched into the 2x mode or 2x magnification mode. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind is that the working distance, which is defined as the distance of the subject from the front element of the lens, now this has to be around 8 centimeters for 1x and about 6 centimeters for the 2x mode. If it is not within this range, then it will not be 1x or 2x. In my case, if I switch it to S macro, since I already have a teleconverter 2x, it switches me into the 4x magnification mode. Now, I've already processed one of my macro sessions as explained in my workflow for post processing in an earlier video. And now we'll go through that entire session and I will explain the settings that I used for every image and why. Now, let's open up Lightroom. Now, half of these shots are taken in my balcony and the other half is in my local park. The first half is in my balcony. Let's start with an example that I specifically took to demonstrate the sunlight part. This is one of those. Now, because sunlight is falling directly on the compound eyes, you can see these ugly artifacts. So, ideally, use your diffuser or yourself to cover the sun. Don't let it fall directly. This is another similar example. The sunlight falling directly. You can see the ugly artifacts. Now, this is a 200% zoom. I generally use 200% just to make sure I get the details right. And I think I have one more example, right? So, same thing here, sunlight falling directly, and because it was a breezy day, you'll see some of these blurred. In this, I just changed my position to cover the sunlight, and you have decent eyes. This is at f14. This is the same. Sunlight, compound eyes, artifacts, totally useless. Okay, let's start with the first one here. This is a fly, f18, 1/60th, ISO 400. You can see the pollen, you can see the compound eyes, all the details are there. Now, the background, if you notice, is greenish black because there's nothing behind it. If I was to change my angle and something was in the background, it would not be so clean. And actually, then I did change my angle to get an even darker background. And then I rotated it, and this is a soldier fly, probably of some kind. This is at f18, and you can see the eyes are resolved perfectly, the hair detail, etc. is fine. Now, overexposing, in my opinion, is totally fine, and underexposure could well be a crime. So, never be afraid to push up your ISO or open wider, because this can always be adjusted. But if you lose shadow detail, then you can't really recover it. So, this is the sunlight example. This is an aphid, f18, 1/60th, and you can see the eyes are resolved. Plenty of aphid shots. This is the same fly. Now, this is a very tiny one. Because of the breeze, the focus shifted to somewhere on the back instead of the eye. In this one, yeah, the eyes come through, and if we just lower the exposure a bit, it's perfect. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this is also at f18, no issues. This I could not really figure out whether it was dead or alive. It seemed like an aphid. It's almost exactly like an aphid from a distance. This is at f16, eyes are resolved. This is at f22, the eyes are still resolved because this is a very close shot. Okay, so now we take a look at the next one. This is how it looks like from a distance. This is yet another aphid, f16, the eyes are resolved. And this is what the aphid looks like from a distance. This we've already talked about. Now this is from my park, cotton bug probably, wandering on leaves, but very breezy. The lady is trying to mate, I guess. So this is one of the scenarios where I had to switch from the smallest single point to the next one, slightly larger, because of the breeze. The small point is very small and very accurate, but if it is a windy day, then you probably need to use a larger AF point. Okay, this is a bug of some kind. I have missed the focus here. Next shot, I get close to it, which is why you shoot continuous. This was just a beautiful sight. Lady in a flower. Okay, but let's take a look at this is f18, and then we have this fly. This is at f18. Almost got the eyes. Same here, probably can be recovered. Okay, so this is a bit closer, and therefore at f16 the eyes are resolved. Because of the wind, I just could not get close to these guys. This was in between leaves, large leaf kind of flowery plant. So ideally I would have liked to get the focus point right in the center, but because of the distance between the eyes, they would still not be resolved in complete focus. So this is the same fly. I tried a couple of times, but One, it was difficult to get close enough because of the flash, diffuser, and of course mounted on the camera, and the wind. And this is yet another fly. This is F16. Eyes are resolved. Ant of some kind, F14. Not sure what this is. This is F14, but since there is no fine detail, I stopped down to a full F22. This is also from a distance because of the location and wind. So now this is at F22. So although I get more depth, I would still not be able to resolve both the eyes. It's just too far apart. This is yet another small fly at F16. This is at F18. ISO remains 400. Leaf hopper at F18. Same at F22. For the simple reason, when there is no fine detail, you don't need to open wide. Two-tailed spider in hiding. This was kind of tough. Could not be done with a single smallest AF point because of the wind. Some kind of spider. These are a couple of aphids and a very tiny spider along with probably a catch of some kind. And this is at F22. Just to try and get some detail out. Links at F16, bugs, and this is at F16, and then I stop down to F22 because there's no fine compound eye or detail. This is also F22 now. Same reason. Everything is clean, resolved. This is F22 again. This is also F18 and the eyes are resolved. So basically you don't need to fear diffraction in the real world. Now this at F16 the focus went slightly out because of the wind, otherwise might have been a decent one. This is when I actually came back home on a windowsill. They just kept climbing and falling. So now that we've seen this shoot, let me just show you a couple of balcony shot examples. This is a regular housefly blowing a bubble. This is the final processed image. And this is at F22. If you note, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. This is at F22 with the MC20. And the ISO is 800. So, like I mentioned earlier, do not be afraid to push up the ISO and stop down to the max possible. As long as you're close enough, you'll get all the details. That's it for now. Have fun till the next one.